Hi, my name is Lauren Doobie. I'm partnering with the Decent Innovation Gym today to show you how to create a tapestry weaving or a looming, just like this one. So what you're going to need to start are some supplies. You want a frame of some kind. You can use a picture frame. You can build your own frame. I took a canvas frame and just removed the canvas from it. You just want a wood that you can put nails into. You'll want 50 to 100 1-inch wood nails. You'll want butcher's twine or some other string that does not have any stretch. You'll want an assorted yarn, so you'll want different colors that you'll be using, and I suggest having different thicknesses of yarn. You're also going to want some sort of weaving shuttle. Those are those big plastic needles that you can fit yarn through, but if you don't have one of those, like I didn't have, you can just use wire or you can use pipe cleaner. Some of the tools you'll need are hopefully things you will have. Just around the house, you want a hammer, a ruler, scissors, spacer. So a spacer, to me, you can use cardboard. I used a folder. It's just something that's long enough for your weaving and about 4 to 5 inches tall. And then the last thing you'll need is a lot of patience. Hopefully this will be a lot of fun and you can enjoy it and relax. So let's get started. So starting with the frame, you're going to take a ruler and measure every 1/4 inch, and at every 1/4 inch you're going to nail in one of those wood nails. It seems like a lot, but that is useful because we are going to be stringing with the butcher's twine. Starting at the very bottom left, you're going to go every other nail. I sort of brought mine in a little bit so that it's faster for me to weave, so I'm just teaching you. You can do the entirety of the loom if you'd like, but you're going to make sure you're starting at the bottom and ending at the bottom so that you have an even number of what we call warp threads. And you want them to be pretty tight, not so tight, you don't have to worry too much about it, just enough that you can lightly strum it, they're not loosely hanging, and just tie them off. And you're going to put a spacer into the very bottom. That's, like I said, about 4 or 5 inches. And that's just leaving room so that you can tie it off later. And then the other thing I'm going to put in is I'm going to put in just a ruler. You can use another spacer of some kind, something stiff, but I use a ruler, and this is going to be very useful when actually weaving. Okay, so the first thing we're going to weave is using that butcher's thread again. What I do is I just bundle a little bit of it in my hand. I used a little bit too much at first, but you just wrap it around your hand until it gets to something that you can pass through the weave. And this is again the butcher's twine, and we're going to make a footer. So the way you weave, and this is just how you weave anything, is you start by twisting the ruler so you create some sort of tent, and then in that tent you can actually push through your bundle of thread and absolutely make sure that you're leaving a 4 to 5 inch tail at the bottom and not pulling it all the way through. And then you're going to pass back the opposite direction, and this time you're going to pull up the yarn that was underneath the ruler, and you're going to individually pass your bundle through those. So this way you're going over, under the first pass, and then on the way back you're going under, over, doing the opposite, and that's how you create a weave. And then once you do that, you want to pull all of the threads very, very lightly to the bottom. And you do not want to pull this super tight, because then you will cause your warp thread to sort of shrink in on itself and, narrow it. And you don't want that. You want it to be loose. You want it to be soft. And so you can just pretty lightly brush it all down to the bottom. And then I'm going to repeat that 6 times so that we have enough of a footer to get started and add a little bit of stability. Okay, so once the footer is complete, what we're going to be doing is I'm going to show you how to add tassels. And my yarn was pretty thin. If you have a more textured yarn, you can use that. But what I just did was I looped the yarn upon itself for about 6 inches, just back and forth until I had a bundle of 6. And I cut that and I used it to place over 2 of the warp strands, starting at the very left. And then I tucked the sides under in between the middle of those two strands. So like I said, you put it on top, and then you take the right side and you pull it under the right warp string, and then you take the left side and you pull it from under the left warp string. So you have them coming out through the middle, and then do not pull them super tight. Like I said, you want to keep everything fairly loose, so just lightly brush it to the bottom and make it look, you know, where you're not pulling those warp strings together, you're just holding the tassel in place. And so I repeated that across the first row, and then I did it again to add a little fullness, but I shifted it over by one warp string so it's staggered. And then after that was complete, I just took my scissors and I trimmed those ends so it looked like nice, neat, pretty tassels. Okay, and once I completed the tassels, I went ahead and I wove in a little bit of purple, the exact same way you did the footer is the exact same way you're going to be weaving everything else, so that's pretty simple. The biggest thing is you remember to leave those tails, so those, you know, 5-6 inch tails that you're going to be using later on. When you're switching colors, you do not want to be tying these. Tying these will just create these big ugly knots that you do not need. So what you're going to do is you're just going to leave them. So when I'm starting with this blue, I'm starting on the same side as I just ended the purple. You don't want to be starting on the opposite side or else you will have a gap. So starting on the same side, I'm leaving a nice long tail of the blue, and I'm going to be showing you guys how to create sort of blending, which is another version of just switching off your strings. So I'm going to about the middle, and I'm doing a strand or two of that going back and forth. And once I do the first one, I see how far that went, and I don't want to stop there. I want to do the next one a little bit further by one string so that you have room in the middle that you're alternating between these two colors. So when I'm doing my red, like I said, you start on the same side. With the blue, I went to the middle from the left. So with the red, I'm starting from the middle at the left, and I'm weaving in where the blue left off, and then I'm going back to where the blue ended. Sort of like this diagram, it's a little hard to explain, but you basically want to create it so that there are no holes or gaps between the red and the blue and where they connect. So every other time you do a strand, you want it to alternate between one or the other so that each time you go through, both sides are covering this middle area. Okay, and so I'm just going to continue that. I'm going to do a few more different things, and we're going to move on to something a little interesting, and this is creating shapes. So I did something very simple. I just did a circle. I took a cup, or you can take anything that is circular like a bowl, and I placed it on top of my warp strands, and I took a Sharpie and I just marked along where that circle was, and then those are my guidelines for where the yarn was going to go. So I took the normal weaving pattern that we do with the footer or with the purple, and I just filled it in up into where I saw the black marks from the Sharpie, and that just sort of follows that curve, and it makes it look like you've woven a circle. And then after you've done that, you want to fill in the sides so that you are meeting the same area where you have your circle and trying not to leave too many gaps. So if you see at the very beginning, when I'm weaving in that blue next to the yellow, there's sort of this area where the circle is perpendicular to the warp strands, and if that goes on for too long, you see it creates sort of this hole. And if you have a lot of those, it can really mess with the integrity of your weaving. So once you get to the point where you can start encroaching upon the yellow and bringing that hole together, try to do so. You want your weaving to have as few holes as possible, and you want it to all be cohesive, like when you do the blending, like with the next thing I'm going to show you is I made clouds with these. You can really make whatever you want. These are sort of these loops that are very reminiscent of just carpet. And the way you do that is I just took a pencil and I started out and I added in 3 rows of just normal weaving, and that adds a little bit of structure before you start with the looping. And so when you want to start with the looping, you bring your pencil up to the same line you're working on, and you're going to go for each warp strand, you're going to go under the warp strand, then under the pencil, and then on to the next one. So you go under each strand, not just every other one, and then under the pencil, and then under the next strand. And you repeat that for the entirety. And then do not pull out the pencil. You want to leave that pencil in until you get at least 2 more strands of normal weaving on top. So once you do your loops, you move on, leaving the pencil in, do 2 more strands, push them down so that it is holding those loops tight, and then you can proceed to gently pull out the pencil, and it gives you those beautiful fluffy little loops that looks like clouds. Okay, so I just did a little bit more filling in with another cloud, some more plain weaving, and then finally I did a header, which is the exact same as your footer. You want to be using the butcher's twine, and you just want to do a layer on top. And what you're going to do is you're going to flip your entire loom over, and you're going to tuck those individual strands. So I have a few sticking out in the front just so you can see them, because you are supposed to be leaving them out. But normally whenever you're doing this, to make it a little bit easier, you will have those tucked behind. And so when we flip it over to see the back, you're going to see a lot more of those strands. And what I'm going to do is normally use a shuttle. I just have a little piece of wire that I folded, and I'm going to be taking each of those individual strands that are sticking out, and I'm going to be weaving them back into the rest of the weave, and I'm going to be pulling them at least through a few, and then just leaving them there and cutting them. You're not tying any knots, you're not leaving anything bulky in the way. You're just lightly pulling them through a few others, making sure that it doesn't stick out the front, and then you're cutting them all. Make sure you also do this with the strings of the header and the footer, but for now we're going to flip it back over and we're going to move on to how you tie it off and get it removed from your strand. So here you can see the back of mine. See, it's nice and tucked pretty well. What you're going to do is you're just going to take your scissors and snip at the very top. I'm going to start on the left, and you're going to take the left strand and go over the next one, and then back under, and then just pull it straight down lightly. So this is what you're going to do. Repeat that with the next one: over, under, through, and pull it very lightly. The tension will kind of change as you go across because you're being held with fewer and fewer strands, but you should be able to cut and tie them all and then pull them down so that they're facing inwards. And then you're just going to do the same way you tucked everything else. You want to take those with a shuttle or with a wire, and you want to tuck those down into the tapestry, the back of the tapestry. And you repeat that exact same thing with the footer. And then once you have completed this, you have your tapestry weaving, and you can take liberties and make this whatever pattern, whatever color you want. I just showed you the very, very basics of different weaves, how to blend, how to get started. This is something that can be very nice and relaxing and pleasant to do while you're just bored at home or stressed from studying or finals. Hope you guys enjoy. Thank you so much.